Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Abigail. In this film, we center on a bunch of would-be criminals. They have basically come together to all partake in holding hostage this little 12-year-old girl who is the daughter of some very powerful, rich figure. They're not entirely sure what's going on, but they're told that if they hold her for ransom for 24 hours, they will be rewarded as a result. It seems like it's going to be easy enough, but as the night progresses, they start to realize that there are some weird behaviors that this girl is exhibiting, and she might be a lot more dangerous than they suspected. So, Abigail, I was very excited for this film. I mean, just hearing that Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett were once again teaming up for another original horror film had me really hyped. I really loved their last non-Scream film, Ready or Not. I thought that was just such a knockout breakthrough film for these two. Just such a fun sense of style, such an simple premise, but a very effective one, and had just as much comedy as it did these like really shocking horror moments, and I really love what they did with that film. And then both of the Scream movies that they did, the first one they did I thought was very effective. Scream 6 I never did a review for, but I did really enjoy that film. I think it goes a little bit too off the rails in the third act, but I did really enjoy it overall, and just seeing the two of them come back together and, wrangling up a really talented ensemble, I was just really excited to see what this was going to be. I thought the marketing for this film was really strong. I love the idea of what they were getting at, that, you have this girl who they are holding ransom, and she turned out to be this, like, bloodthirsty vampire. I thought that was just such a fun premise overall, so I was really hoping that this film would deliver, and this absolutely did everything I was hoping for. Abigail is just an absolute blast from start to finish. It further showcases the talent of these two, and honestly might just be their strongest film yet, and we're just getting into that right now. Starting off when it comes to the cast here, like I said, going into this film, I think that was easily one of the biggest draws for me. I mean, just so many incredible actors in this film, and thankfully this is one of those instances where you have a really talented cast and everybody really does deliver. I don't think there's a single actor in this movie that doesn't have at least one memorable scene, that doesn't make at least somewhat of an impression. I think everyone really does a great job, but we gotta start off talking about Melissa Barrera, who is just quickly becoming, I think, one of the most talented of her generation, and here I think gives one of her strongest performances. The character of Joey is someone who really kind of ends up being the emotional anchor of the film in a way I wasn't really expecting. She has some emotional baggage of her own that she is going through within this movie, and I found that to be, really well done. I think she does a good job of diving into that, but also diving into how much this character is very intelligent, how quick she is on her feet, and how willing she is, to face the situation head on. You really find yourself loving her character. You latch onto her very well. She's a very easy character, I think, to find relatable and things like that, and I just thought that she did a really great job here. She's continuing to show why she is such a dynamic actress, and I'm just really happy to see that she continues to, obtain projects like this. I know, obviously, there was, some stuff that happened with her, very unjustifiably, in my opinion, and I think this film really just showcases, like, how much they, Skydance fucked up in firing her from Scream, because she was just such an asset to that franchise, and I think any film moving forward, she will continue to be a real asset for. I just cannot wait to see what else she's going to do within her career. I love seeing how much she continues to progress as an actress and how successful she's become, and I think this is easily one of her strongest performances yet. And Dan Stevens, once again, gives such a fantastic performance. I talked about in Godzilla and Khan how I think he's one of the best character actors working today, and this film makes a very good case as to why that is. I mean, he just has such an energy and liveliness to him that is so easy to latch onto, but he also is a character that's like shrouded in mystery. There's a lot of things about Frank that we are questioning throughout this film, and I think Stevens gives one of the most challenging performances of the entire film. You're not entirely sure how to feel about this guy at multiple points throughout the movie, and I found him to be such an interesting character as a result. Particularly the third act of this film, I thought he had some really strong moments, and I really loved what he ended up doing here. I thought that he just did an excellent job when it came to this character. Those two are really great, but I gotta say, Kevin Durand is another actor that just really impressed me in this movie. He plays this guy, Peter, who is kind of like the hired gun of sorts. He's the guy that is, the most physical out of all of them, and he isn't exactly the smartest, and he has a lot of great scenes in this movie. He easily has some of the funniest moments throughout this entire film, and I just really enjoyed his performance a lot here. There's one moment in particular with him where he starts to show a little bit more vulnerability, and I thought that was some of the funniest stuff throughout this entire movie. I just really loved his performance here. Does a great job at showing the physicality of this character, but also how deep down emotional this character is, and I thought he was just really great. Kathryn Newton, I've always been a big fan of, but I think this is easily one of her most impressive performances. She's playing a character that I think could be very annoying, but Newton's charm and likability really just ends up paying off in dividends, and I just really enjoyed what she ended up bringing to the table here. She's this hacker of sorts who is very wealthy, and therefore a lot of her skills aren't exactly, you know, something that is applicable to this situation, so you kind of see how out of her element she is, and I really enjoyed watching her throughout this film. I thought she was just a lot of fun here. I really enjoyed her performance in this film. And then Giancarlo Esposito is Giancarlo Esposito. He's giving another really great performance as this guy Lambert. I can't really say much else about him, but he's really good. Angus Cloud, also really great. Sucks that, you know, he's no longer with us, of course, but he gives a really great performance here. But I gotta say, out of all of these actors, the standout of this entire movie might just be Alisha Weir, who plays Abigail, and holy shit, this is exactly the kind of child performance that just you watch and you are so incredibly blown away by him. Look, this is not the first time she has impressed me. I saw her in Matilda the Musical a couple years ago. Not a lot of people watch that movie, but she was fantastic in that. And here, I think she gives an even greater performance because she's so incredibly multifaceted throughout this film. There are moments where you are so intimidated by Abigail and you really see just how demented she is and the lengths she's willing to go and how much she's willing to, you know, complicate things for all these different characters. But you also do find yourself understanding her, and she adds so many layers to this character. There's one scene in particular, you know, and you see in the trailer, involving her, you know, being held in this jail cell, and her performance in that scene just really ended up blowing me away. The way that she, you know, the way that she discussed her entire plan and everything that she was willing to do. I mean, you really just feel like this character is going to be impossible to handle at every point. She continues to overcomplicate things for these characters, and she just does a really great job of diving headfirst into all of that. What a great physical performance as well. I mean, she really just goes to so many lengths, and I was just so impressed with her. I think she absolutely, after watching this movie, like I said, I loved her in her previous works, but this film, there's no doubt in my mind that she is on her way to becoming one of the most impressive child actresses working today. I need to see her in something immediately after this film. I love the work she ends up giving here. I think she gave such a phenomenal performance, and in a film that has a lot of great actors here, she honestly might end up being the standout out of all of them. Everyone really does a great job. I don't think there's a single actor that isn't on their A game in this movie, and I really did find myself just impressed by this entire ensemble. I think this is one of those films where, in order for this to even be slightly entertaining, you need an ensemble that is really into what they're doing and willing to bring everything to the table. And gratefully, that is the ensemble we're dealing with here. I think everyone just does a great job in this movie, and I really can't think of a single performance that didn't impress me in some way. Alright, so now let's get into the directing and the writing, which, listen, when it comes to Radio Silence, we know their style, we know what they're really good at, and they do very much retain that here. This film goes in just as many of the, like, zany and quirky directions that we expect to see from their films. What really impressed me about this one in particular is that for the first, like, hour or so, it's not really a horror film. It is way more of this sort of thriller of sorts, where we're getting to, you know, it's way more of this, like, comedy type thriller of sorts, where we're getting to know all these characters and things like, which I'll talk more about in the screenplay. And I really appreciated that from them. I feel like they showed a little bit more restraint when it came to this movie, and then going all out and going crazy, you know, when the film eventually does become a horror film, but I like the fact that they do challenge themselves here. They spend a good portion of this movie where you think it is just a straightforward, like, heist film, basically. And I think the movie does work very well as such, so I really like the way they challenge themselves here, but again, I like that they know what works at this point. I mean, the comedy is still so incredibly on point. There were so many moments that had me laughing hysterically in this film, but there were just as many moments that had me feeling connected to, that had me riveted, that had me, invested in what was going on. They do a good job of also adding a bit more of heart to this movie. I feel like Ready or Not, it definitely had that, but this film had a little bit more in that way, and I thought something I really did appreciate is just how much more they put into this film. So I like that even though, yes, they know what works as a style, they're still finding ways to challenge themselves as directors. And I've said this before, I think the best directors are the ones that do evolve beyond what their style is known for, and I like seeing that, quite a few films in, that's something that Radio Silence has done. They're not just doing Ready or Not again. Yes, there are similar elements to this film to Ready or Not, but I would not all call this, I've seen people say this film feels too similar to that, and I just don't really see it. I think this film takes a lot more chances that film didn't, and that's something I really did appreciate overall. But I really do want to talk about the writing here, because I've seen a lot of people discuss how they thought the screenplay wasn't as strong this time around, and I'll just go ahead and get the elephant out of the room right now. There have been countless articles, countless videos about how this movie would be a lot more effective if the twist that was revealed like halfway through this film wasn't known in the trailers. And yes, maybe there is perhaps a world where they could have done something like a Barbarian, where, they go into the room and they see something horrifying and we don't exactly know what it is. That definitely is something that they could have done. But I don't think, knowing that she is a vampire going into this film, I don't think that at all ruins the suspense. I don't think it ruins the story, because yes, that is like an hour into the film, but there's still a lot of movie preceding that and a lot of movie after that I didn't know about. For example, when it came to the characters in this movie, that's an aspect that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. I thought all the characters in this film were fantastic. Something I really appreciate is that they really do take a lot of time to not just get you to understand these characters and their motivations, because each of them have a reason for partaking in this heist, and you really find yourself latching onto the characters as a result. When it comes to our main character, Joey, for example, she has a personal reason for why she's here. There's a reason why she wants this money. There's a reason why she is resulting to, participating in this crime. There's a reason why she's doing that. And that's one of the reasons you really find yourself latching onto her character. There is something that she has done within her past, and you can see throughout this film she's trying to kind of forgive herself for it. And I really like when the film dived deeper into that. I thought that part of the film was really interesting. I really found myself latching onto her. There's some other characters in this movie that have other reasons for being here. But what I also love is that there's a lot of distrust that is set up throughout the film between these characters. They have a lot of animosity towards each other. There are things revealed early on that gets them to start to think that there's a mole in the group. So there's a lot of interesting conflict going on before we get to the ultimate reveal of what's happening. And yes, maybe that is, the fact that we know what actually is happening makes this a little bit less interesting. But no, I think it sets up the conflict in this film really well. You get to understand why each character is involved, but you also get to understand, but it also gives you an idea of what this movie might actually be. We're not watching a bunch of people who are necessarily working together and like working together. A lot of them can't stand each other. A lot of them, feel like the other is after them, or that, people want, or that someone in the group wants the money for selfish reasons, or that someone is coming after them, or something like that. Like, there's a lot of interesting conflict that is set up here, and I think that makes the film that much more interesting. So when all the crazy shit starts to go down, we are that much more invested, not just because we love seeing what's happening, but also because we care about these characters. And I can generally say that, yes, I cared about these characters. I found myself latching onto each and every one of them, and that is something I think this film just did a really great job with. It's this great scene in a bar, especially, where everyone's kind of going over their motivations and their past. And what's interesting about it is that you don't actually know if the story that they're telling is the true story, because one of the things they're told early on in the film is that they can't use their real names or their real backstories. So you actually don't know whether or not these characters are being truthful. And I think that makes the film that much more interesting as well, because you actually don't know everyone's true motivations. There's a lot of characters here that are kind of shrouded in mystery, and that only makes this film that much more compelling, because while yes, maybe you connect with a character at first, you don't actually know if that's why they're here. And I think as the film goes on, even when we start to understand, more of what these characters are dealing with in terms of the person that they've kidnapped, you still feel that same level of tenseness, because while yes, they're all kind of thrust into this situation, you still don't know how these characters are really going to handle it, and I think it makes the film that much more interesting. And the thing about this movie is that, you're thrown right into it. The movie starts immediately with the kidnapping, and so we know exactly what these characters are getting into. Now it's just about seeing how exactly this is all going to play out, and I think that's what makes this film a lot more interesting, is that because we are so adverse to the environment that we're in as much as the characters are, we are just as intrigued to figure out what is really going on and what this is really all about. And the thing with Abigail is that, yes, even though we know that she is a vampire, the film still does a really good job of getting you to connect to her character and her bond, and how all these different characters interact with her. The way that, say, Dan Stevens' character, interacts with her is different from, say, how Kathryn Newton interacts with her. And I found that to be really interesting. They each have their own sort of approach for how they're going to handle this kidnapping and how they're going to handle talking to her. And I thought that was really great. But I think easily one of the best parts of this entire film is the bond that Melissa Barrera's character, ends up developing with Abigail. It's, yes, we kind of see it in the trailer, but it's expanded a lot more than I expected to be, and it really adds this level of heart to the film where, even though, yes, you don't know if what is being told is true, you find yourself really connecting to these characters as a result. You can see that Joey has a much different approach for handling this situation than the other characters do, and I found that to be, those scenes are some of the best within the entire film. We get a sense of where they're both at, some similarities between them, and I just really found myself endeared to those two characters. I think that it was really crucial in getting us to not just care about, situation, but also gets to really care about these characters and, when things go sideways, how that ends up affecting them. I think the movie does a really great job in setting up all of that. So while, yes, I can understand why someone would watch this and feel like the movie is underwhelming in the first act, because there's so much that is shrouded in secrecy when we already know what Abigail is all about. But again, there's so much other inner conflict and interesting dynamics going on, and so much distrust between these characters, that I think there's just enough to still keep me intrigued. And so I didn't find myself bored at all. I actually found myself super invested in what was going on, and really just wanting to know how it was all going to play out, what was going to get her to crack, what was going to get her to reveal, who she really was. I like seeing the way the film built up to that moment. Now, that said, when the film does eventually reveal what's going on, it gets so much more wilder and really does deliver in the way that you're hoping. And that's something that I think worked out really well here. The movie gets so much more crazier at that point, and when it reveals itself to be a horror film, I think it is very effective in that regard. But again, it's because of how well they set everything up that I think it is even slightly exciting to watch, because the point is, while yes, those moments were crazy, I cared about the characters that were involved in what was going on, and I thought the film worked really well with that, but also really just playing into the wit of this film. This movie is frequently hilarious. There are so many moments that had me absolutely dying of laughter. I think when it comes to Kevin Durand's character especially, he has so many hysterical moments in this movie, especially because he kind of is the dumb one in the group. There's a lot of moments where he'll say things and you just end up laughing at just kind of the buffoonery of his character, but he's just such a fun character to watch, and I really did enjoy him. But also just, again, the interaction between these two characters as they're kind of scrambling to figure out how to handle this situation and how to get it, how to get a handle on things. It's just so well done here, and I thought they did a really great job with that. So overall, I think this was just a really successful screenplay. I think there's such masters at dialogue, and I think that Stephen Shields and Guy Busick, once again, they just do a great job of retaining that wit, retaining that fun that they've had in other films, but also adding a lot of interesting new layers that we didn't really see before, and I think they really kind of doubled down on that here really well. When it came to the cinematography in this movie, I think once again this film just really succeeds with that. The mansion itself, you really do kind of feel trapped here. You know that, these characters are kind of stuck here for a bit, and so you do kind of feel that claustrophobic feeling, but it also is so much bigger than what we saw in, say, like Ready or Not. There's so many, hidden places that these characters end up going, and I think there's so much striking imagery here, and that's something I really do appreciate. But the film also really succeeds when it comes to, I think, the CGI in this movie. The physicality of Abigail, once she, transforms into her true monstrous self, is generally so well, it's so tangible. You really do feel like, if this situation were to play out, this is probably what she would look like, and I think the film does a really great job with that. There's a scene in a holding cell especially that really ends up working out when it comes to the physicality, but also the gruesome area, when it comes to the gruesome kills as well. I mean, this film really does not hold back in any way, but also goes in some really creative directions. There's one especially involving a dance. That's all I'm gonna say. There's this really cool thing they do involving a dance and an ability that Abigail has, and I was generally blown away. I did not know how this was all going to play out, but I thought it was such an interesting idea, and I thought there was something that they just delved into really well. I thought the world building, not really world building, but like giving us a sense of the extent of Abigail's, giving us a sense of the extent of Abigail's powers, what she's really capable of, what they're really up against. They do a really great job of showcasing that, and I think the film really did deliver on that front, and really does go to those gory places that you are hoping for, and doing it in a really twisted and fun way. So I really did enjoy the cinematography in this film, and like I said, when it comes to scares in this movie, the movie's never particularly scary. There's certainly moments that had me unnerved. There's certainly moments that had me on the edge of my seat, but it's not really a scary film. It's much more comedic, even more so, I would say, than like a Ready or Not, and I think the film knows that. It doesn't try to take itself too seriously at any point. But there are some moments that are generally unsettling, and I think those moments are very effective, and I think that's something that the film did do a really good job of, particularly in the first act of the movie when you don't really know what's going on. I think there's some really great moments there. And the score, I really did enjoy a lot. Brian Taylor, I think, is a very underrated composer, and I think that he does a really good job of just heightening the tension and the thrills of what's going on. I think he does a really great job with that in this film, and I really enjoyed his score throughout the movie. The pacing as well, I didn't really have an issue with. I've heard people say the movie is too slow paced, but I appreciate the fact that it was a slow burn, because again, once we get to those places where the film goes really wild and crazy, it is that much more effective. So I really didn't have a problem with the pacing, and by the time we get to Abigail becoming her true form, the movie gets a lot more fast-paced from there, and I think it really does end up succeeding very well. And then the ending of this movie, I mean, if you want to talk about an ending that, yes, can be slightly predictable, but maybe goes in some unexpected directions that still have you really drawn to what's going on and has you absolutely riveted and just has you gripping, but also surprisingly goes in some emotional directions. I mean, look no further than the third act of this movie. I was so just like drawn, I was so laser focused on what was happening the entire time, and like I said, I think while there were some things I predicted, the direction that things went was not at all how I expected this film to pan out, and I think it made it that much more exciting as a result. And also, I think the way things end up happening to these characters up to that point, it made the finale that much more thrilling. The way things were going, it wasn't at all what I was expecting to happen. So, like, yes, there were things that, like, I kind of thought, okay, this might be a thing they do. The way they got there was not at all how I expected to happen. So I still found the film very riveting throughout. So really, virtually everything about this film really does end up working. I think the only thing that really does bring it down is just while I did enjoy how much focus we got on all of these characters, there are some here who have some plot lines that start up and they don't really end up going much of anywhere, and I was a little bit underwhelmed by that. I wish they tapped more into some of the ideas they had early on. I understand that, like, obviously we want to get into the thick of things and things like that, but I really did appreciate how restrained the first act of this movie was when we're really just peeling back the layers of all these characters and things like that. I thought they did a good job with that. And there's some characters I just wish they dived a little bit deeper into. But other than that, I mean, this film really just did everything that I was hoping for with a talented cast. I mean, a razor-sharp screenplay, so many wild and crazy directions, also putting just as much emphasis on the bonkers moments as they do on the characters, and really giving you a sense of who they are and going in some surprisingly effective and emotional directions, but also being absolutely hysterical and so glorious entertaining throughout. Abigail just really did everything right. It continues to showcase just how much of just bona fide talents Radio Silence really is becoming. I think that we really are starting to see them as one of the go-tos when it comes to horror. If you want something that just goes in like really unexpected and original directions, I think they do a really great job with that. Yes, the movie does go in some does have some predictable moments to it, but with just how much fun and how riveting so much of it is, I really can't complain all that much. I feel like if, you know, throughout the films that they have done so far, I am just fully on board with all the lunacy, all the wit that they end up having. I love the directions they've ended up taking with all their films, and I think it's just another example of what they do best, and I just can't wait to see what else they do in future projects. Overall, Abigail, I just thought was such an absolute blast, and really just ended up working for me on pretty much every level, and I am going to give it overall an A. But over, guys, from my review of Abigail, let me know if you guys saw this one overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.